Hi, what I wanted to do was to finish up where we left off in class on Wednesday. And so what we were doing in this context was to think about how we would define a real variable given a nominal variable and a price index. And our specific example is looking at the US federal minimum wage. What we concluded with in class on Wednesday was the observation that while the nominal wage has increased, obviously, from $3.10 per hour to $7.25 per hour, it was not sufficient to compensate for the underlying rate of inflation during this time period. And so we saw this in two ways. One way was to calculate the 1980 real wage, which we calculated as $3.59 per hour, and to calculate the 2018 real wage, which we calculated as $2.89 per hour. Then the additional thing that we did, and where we kind of wrapped up fairly quickly on Wednesday, was to ask the question, suppose the 1980 minimum wage had kept up with inflation, what should it have been in 2018? And so that use of should is something that I don't mean it in a normative sense. I mean it in a positive sense. And specifically, we could be asking, let me see if I can draw down a page here. We were asking the question, what is the 2018 value of the 1980 minimum wage? So again, we did this in class on Wednesday, but I want to just set the stage here. What is the 2018 value of the 1980 minimum wage? And what I said in class is that I just presented this formula and then I said, we'll talk about it. So here's where we're going to be talking about it. What we would do is we would take the 1980 minimum wage and we would multiply that by the consumer price index in 2018 divided by the consumer price index in 1980. And so that's equal to $3.10 per hour times 2.51233 divided by 0.863. So again, we express the CPI here as the number divided by 100. And what we came up with was $9.02 per hour. And our conclusion was that if we had a federal minimum wage that just kept up with inflation, or in other words, allowed people to just maintain their purchasing power, to buy the same set of goods and services in 2018 as they could in 1980, the minimum wage would have had to have been $9.02 per hour. And so we talked about this idea that calls for $11 per hour, $15 per hour, or even higher are incorporating as well the fact that labor productivity has grown over these years and that should be reflected in a higher wage. And then correctly, if you're in fact, when people come up with higher values of the appropriate minimum wage, what they're doing is using a year earlier than 1980 as the benchmark year. And you can follow the link that's in the notes to read further about that if you're interested. What I wanted to do at this point, though, is to think a little bit more about this formula. So specifically, what is this consumer price in this ratio of the two consumer price indices? So 2018 divided the CPI in 2018 divided by the CPI in 1980. What this is numerically, of course, is this number or this fraction. And if you calculate it, it is 2.911. And what I want to do is try to make some sense of that and then use this as a way to motivate indexation. So in particular, if we consider the inflation rate, now we can ask, what is the inflation rate from 1980 to 2018? So the rate of inflation is the growth rate of the average price level. So it's the percentage change in the average price level. In this case, our measure of the average price level is the consumer price index. And so this would be the CPI in 2018 minus the CPI in 1980 divided by the CPI in 1980. And technically, if we wanted to express it as a percentage, so I'm just going to use dashed brackets here for now, and you'll see why in a minute, we would multiply by 100 to express it as a percentage. So if we rewrite this, notice that what this rate of inflation calculation gives us is that this is the CPI in 2018 divided by the CPI in 1980 minus 1. And again, we could put in the conversion to a percentage if we wanted to be precise. And so what is that? Well, we already saw that this CPI in 2018 divided by the CPI in 1980 is 2.911 minus 1. So the rate of inflation that we would have, and again, we could put the percentage in here if we wanted, but this would be 1.911 as the and then it would be in percentage terms 191.1%, in other words. And so in our equation that we had before, then what we can conclude with this is that the consumer price index in 2018 divided by the consumer price index in 1980 is equal to, we saw before, 2.911, and that is equal to 1 plus the inflation rate, where that inflation rate is not expressed in percentage terms, right? So in other words, 2.911 is 1 plus 1.911, in other words. So what that means is that if we wanted to think about, again, the 2018 value of the 1980 minimum wage, what we just calculated, we have the following. So let me grab a new page here. When we are calculating the 2018 value of the 1980 minimum wage, we're essentially saying if the minimum wage had grown exactly at the pace of inflation, or at the inflation rate, what would it have been? So in other words, we already saw that this was $9.02 per hour, but what that is equal to the 1980 minimum wage, $3.10 per hour, times 1 plus the inflation rate from 1980 to 2018. So specifically, this would be $3.10 per hour times 1 plus 1.911. So this inflation rate, again, not in percentage terms. This observation is just a special case of the final thing that I wanted to talk about in these notes. This is just a special case of indexing. So this is just a special case of indexing. And when we talk about indexation, what we mean is automatically adjusting wages, benefits, tax brackets, nominal variables, wages, benefits, tax brackets, and other nominal dollar values to compensate for inflation on a year-to-year basis. So in other words, we're asking the question, what should next year's wage be in order to index or compensate for inflation? Or in other words, to ensure the maintenance of purchasing power. And what that means is, again, the idea that from one year to the next, when prices are rising, with your income, you're able to buy the same set of goods and services. So what we can do is think about this in a particular example. Where we're looking at an example in which we have a wage that's indexed. So the consumer price index is the most commonly used measure to construct what's known as a cost of living adjustment, or a COLA. So sometimes you'll hear references to COLA, and in this context it means a cost of living adjustment. And so you can follow the links if you're interested in reading more. And of course, we already talked about the extent to which the CPI can be construed as an appropriate cost of living measure, even though it is used that way. And so this second link here is going to give you information on that. So to consider a specific example, I have the Consumer Price Index in 2017 and the Consumer Price Index in 2016. And what we're going to begin with is considering what the rate of inflation is. And so this is your participation question for today, to calculate the CPI-based rate of inflation from 2016 to 2017. So welcome back from that task. If you did that, what you should have done is to think about, again, the inflation rate is just the percentage change in the average price level, or the price index. And in this case, we're using the consumer price index. So this would be You can divide by 100 or not, as the case may be, but let's do this. So 2.47411 minus 2.42081 divided by 2.42081, and then to calculate the inflation rate, you multiply by 100 to express it as a percentage. And so what you should have found is that this is 2.20%. And so in here, this would be 2.20%. And what we can do with that information is to see if I can advance the what we can do with that information then is to think about how we would index a nominal wage. So the annual CPI-based inflation rate we saw was 0.022. So we don't want to express it in percentage terms for the calculation that we're doing here, but 2.20% in other words. But what goes in here is in these calculations is this number not in percentage terms. And so we would put in here 0.022. And so if the wage, for example, this year was $7.70 per hour, then next year to index this nominal wage rate would require that the wage be $7.87 per hour. So just multiplying 1.022 times $7.70 per hour. Many states, including Missouri, do this kind of wage indexation for their state level minimum wage. And there are lots of other things, as I suggested in the macroeconomy, that are indexed: Social Security payments, tax brackets, other things. We'll have recourse to talk about this, I think, one more time later on this semester. But if you were curious about this, you could open this presentation up as a hyperlink and follow that to read more. So with that, we've concluded these part 2 notes. Thank you for your patience with this. In the next set of notes, we're going to have our very first look at money and interest rates, and think about the relationship between real and nominal interest rates and the rate of inflation. So thanks, and head on to the part 3A notes.